Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be visiting Samarkand in Uzbekistan to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit on the 15th and 16th of September. The 22nd meeting of the Council of Heads of State of the SCO is the first in-person summit since 2019, wherein the leaders are expected to review the organization's activities over the past 2 decades and also discuss the state and prospects of multilateral cooperation in the future. Besides, some important issues of regional and global importance are also likely to be taken up. On the sidelines of the summit, Prime Minister Modi will also hold a few bilateral meetings with the presidents of Russia and Uzbekistan. Whether he'll be meeting the Chinese president and the Prime Minister of Pakistan is a question on which there's no official word yet, but it will be after a long time that all these leaders will be at the same venue in person for a summit meeting. So what's on the agenda of the SCO Summit 2022? Some significant outcomes of the in-person summit this year and related aspects on this edition of Perspective. Joining me is an esteemed panel of experts. So let me begin by introducing them to you. Pleased to welcome with me in the studio Mr. Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. And joining us virtually is former Ambassador Mr. Manjeev Singh Puri and Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor, Hindustan Times. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program today. Mr. Chaudhary, let me begin with you with the most obvious question. What, according to you, are going to be the key focus areas of the SCO Summit 2022, the first in-person summit of the grouping since 2019?
I think the highlight will be, obviously, that Xi Jinping will be making and Vladimir Putin will both be making an appearance at an international summit. Neither of them have been forthcoming on international trips since the pandemic broke out. We will expect a very important Xi and Putin meeting, and everybody will wait to see what happens there because Russia will hope to get some kind of public support from China on its war effort. Modi will also be there, as we know. There is an expectation, given the Chinese pullback on the withdrawal on the border, for some kind of a meeting between the two. Maybe a small pull aside, as they say in diplomacy, but nothing much more than that.
Okay, Mr. Bansal, coming to you, apart from the fact that this is the first in-person meeting of the SCO in the last 2 years, how do you look at the critical and the importance aspect of the SCO Summit?
See, to my mind, I think this is the most significant SCO Summit in its history because it comes at a very particular time when not only leaders are coming after a long confinement due to COVID, but because of various international issues. I think after Russia-Ukraine war, Putin and Xi Jinping will be meeting together. Russia would be meeting large number of countries together at a point, at a crucial point. You have Iran coming to a summit, even though as an observer, at a time when the nuclear deal is approaching its final stages, there are issues with IAEA. We have had Afghanistan government fall. The Central Asian states, the 4 of them which are there, have a different view on Afghanistan, who will be representing Afghanistan, which is, of course, going to be an observer there. That's another issue. Pakistan has a new prime minister. Indian and Pakistani leaders would be there for the first time face to face. India and Xi Jinping, Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping will be there. And because of various issues after Galwan, I think this will be the first face to face. So this conference is filled with opportunities or expectations. How many of them will be fulfilled, how many will not, is a debatable point because nothing is slated. There is no meeting between India and Pakistani leaders which is fixed. There is no leader fixed between India and the Chinese leaders. But these are all within the range of possibilities. On the sidelines, you can have any impromptu meeting which could be path-breaking, which could be momentous. So I think this is a summit I'm sure the globe would be watching very, very carefully. West would be watching because of Russia-Ukraine war. There are a lot of issues, and I think it's a very, very important summit.
Okay, so before we get on to the importance of SCO for India and vice versa, Ambassador, through the day-to-day reports have been rife across television channels that there could perhaps be a meeting between India and China. That Prime Minister Modi could actually have a one-on-one meeting with Chinese President, and indications of this have been since the disengagement process was announced by both countries a few days ago. Is there any indication, do we expect both leaders to be meeting at the SCO Summit? It's going to be the first one, if it happens, since Galwan.
So, Tina, I like what Mr. Alok Bansal just said, that this is a summit which is pregnant with possibilities. What will happen, we don't know. Look, Prime Minister Modi will certainly meet President Xi Jinping at the summit itself. Whether there will be a pull aside, whether there will be a meeting, whether the Chinese will ask for a meeting, are we likely to ask them? I don't think so. Will all of that happen? I'm afraid it would be, more than crystal ball gazing to look at all of this. But you are right that there have been certain developments on the bilateral front which give you a certain indication that, if a few steps are taken forward, there could be a degree of reciprocation, at least in terms of the meetings thaw, which is possible at Samarkand. No doubt about that at all. But, in my opinion, the SCO is a strategically, I don't want to use the word convenient, although it fits in as an acronym, but a strategically useful organization. It brings Russia and China and India. It brings Iran now in there. It brings the Central Asian and Pakistan. It's a very useful place for meeting people with whom we have strategic interests. The West, of course, is a different matter altogether. But these are countries which, with whom we share, if not immediate borders, but which are in our neighborhood or the extended neighborhood. And so, therefore, this is an important summit. That it's taking place in person has its own significance. And, I am at least an old-fashioned believer that there is little substitute for chemistry, and that chemistry matters. And so, therefore, this in-person getting together has its own relevance. Whether, what Mr. Bansal said, possibilities, what will the result in, we'll just have to wait.
Certainly, you're right. Optics mean a lot in diplomacy, and perhaps we'll all have to wait and watch and see what actually transpires at the summit. But before that, Mr. Bansal, let me, very quickly try and understand. India has relatively been a new member of the SCO. It's just in 2017. So it's the fifth year that we are a full member of the SCO. How significant is the organization for us, considering the fact that we have disputes with two of the prominent members?
Well, it is a very, very important organization for us because it is an organization that deals with the Eurasian heartland. I think centuries ago, Mackinder said that whoever actually has an access to Eurasian heartland would dominate the world. So I think the resource-rich area, and as I said, this is an area which is actually growing. I think if you see Russia and China are, of course, big countries in their own rights, but even the Central Asian states, Afghanistan, and this is an extremely, because historically, if we go back into history, when India was a leading economy, we were thriving, trading not only across oceans, but also across Eurasian heartland. The trade routes, the Silk Route convoys, etc. were going on. And I think it's important that this area is considered as our extended neighborhood. In fact, it is part of our neighborhood as well as extended neighborhood, and we have always looked at it from that point of view. And I think India has been, ever since the disintegration of Soviet Union, we have been looking at Central Asia and Eurasian heartland as a huge avenue for resources as well as a big market. And of course, we have cultural connects with these areas. So this is an important arena, and I think as Ambassador Puri said, this is an arena where we get very important players at this point of time. Russia, India, China, of course, the three Eurasian, Asian powers will be there. Of course, you will be having Turkey, you will be having Iran. So you have a large number of people, and especially you will have the troubled state of Afghanistan at this point of time, again, on which different countries of the grouping have different viewpoints.
Absolutely, you're right. And considering the importance, Mr. Chaudhary, also that the SCO is not just another multilateral forum. The collective GDP of these nations participating in the grouping are a quarter of the global GDP, and that's why perhaps it will be significant to see how the leaders, bring up issues of regional as well as global importance. So, in the wake of the geopolitical challenges today that we face and the kind of divisions in the global order that have become sharper, what are some of the important global issues that you see India bring up on the table alongside the other countries?
Well, India, keep in mind, India will also be hosting the SCO next year itself. We will be chairing the SCO. We will also be chairing the G20 next year. In both cases, we need to have these countries come and see us, whatever our problems with China or well, definitely with China maybe. We will be hosting China twice next year on Indian soil. So there has to be a certain degree of politeness, if you wish, between the two sides, and we will need Chinese support for anything we do in the G20. Whatever initiatives, especially on the green side, which I think is going to be the heart of what Prime Minister Modi plans for the G20. So there has to be a certain degree of willingness to work with the Chinese, and I think the Chinese are amenable to that idea, partly because of their own economic problems and the fact that they have banked a lot on having Russia as, if at least a very close partner in their future, if you wish, rivalry with the United States. But Russia has proved to be a bit of an empty shell because of this Ukraine conflict. So I don't think China wants to have too many problems on its hand. Its own COVID issues continue to bother it. So they will be amenable to at least some discussions, I think, or at least open the door for future discussions on what India hopes to do at the G20 and potentially the SCO. The SCO is economically important, but it is completely dominated by China. You gave the figure of quarter of GDP of the world, but almost over half of that is just China by itself. And this will be one of the issues that India will be quietly looking to do, is to ensure that China does not take over the SCO or become overwhelmingly dominant, as is a concern that we have within the BRICS. So it is an interesting game that we'll have to play, of both working with China and also working with others to ensure that China doesn't get ahead of itself.
Absolutely. That's an interesting aspect, Ambassador. The fact that China's dominance within the SCO makes it a difficult proposition for India. Also, the fact that we have seen how, it happened in SARC. Our dispute with Pakistan overshadowed and the grouping could not realize its full potential. Now, with two of the members, we, of course, have territorial disputes and they've only gotten worse in recent years. Could that make it even more difficult for India to, assert its position within the SCO?
So, Tina, let me say something in continuation what Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary was saying. Look, the name itself tells you that this was an organization in which a certain degree of Chinese centricity was kind of there.
Yes. We
We have tried, in a sense, and the fact that, the Pakistanis, the Central Asians, the Iranians, etc., have gotten a certain degree of balance. But, the overwhelming facts, especially on the economic side, and, one should also accept in terms of the political heavyweightness, is with the Chinese. Having said this, I want to take you again to another point which Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary said. Looking at divergences is very easy. And you can say nothing will happen and nothing will be the outcome. But let's try to utilize such opportunities for something happening. He very rightly pointed to the G20, which we will chair next year. And let's leave the SCO Summit, which will also happen. If you want to leave a mark on global happenings, for the near and slightly longer term future, then you will have to find some kind of way in which you work with the Chinese. It doesn't mean that you have to agree to whatever they say. There are areas of divergence. But in terms of the global economic sphere, in terms of the green agenda, etc., I think there are lots of things that can be arranged in terms of a degree of commonality. And again, I would also echo the sentiment that the Chinese also see this in their perspective as they're putting their green foot forward and being part of the global leadership of a changing planet and the ecosystem that we have. So I see in this summit good possibilities of this chemistry, I won't say gelling, but chemistry is coming a bit together, which we, perhaps in the G20 summit later in this year in Indonesia, or at whatever else may happen at the UN, or thereafter in the early parts of next year, we're able to leverage for getting some major deliverables which we are interested in terms of India's interest both bilaterally with various countries, but certainly in terms of our stature in world politics.
Absolutely. Mr. Bansal, what are your thoughts? How big an opportunity is it for India now, looking at the fact that we will be holding the presidency next year, the G20? Does it give us ample opportunity and strengthen our position in terms of laying down the agenda, in terms of setting the narrative of the kind of issues that we want to bring on the table?
Certainly. I think we've already said that the next G20 summit after the Indonesia would be in September, which is we are actually trying to advance it a bit. And I think we would want that summit, if it is a success, we'll have to have some level of cooperation from China. And as I said, recent incidents have actually drawn attention away from congruence that we had with China on many issues. I think there are issues where there is a convergence, where there was a huge convergence. And as I said, green energy, climate change has been one of the issues, I think, on which it is easy to build up a global consensus. In fact, G20 could actually highlight the Prime Minister has given an enormous focus on how green energy needs to be propped up. India is going in a big way. I was in Doha last year, and in fact, even John Kerry said that India has made huge strides as far as cutting down its carbon emissions, etc. are concerned. So that's one area where we will. But as I said, despite all those things, political issues often dominate these proceedings. Absolutely. And while both India and China do not want confrontation, sometimes I think events take charge of the developments. And in fact, we must be in fact, the government has to be very, very cautious. I think the disengagement that has taken place recently is a step forward, but it's not a complete disengagement. It's only taken place in Gogra and Hot Spring area. I think Depsang Plateau, still there is the disengagement is yet to take place. I think we need to pursue this because we have seen it in the past also that there have been huge glimmer of hope that relations are getting back onto normalcy. But again, we have had, because there are forces both across the border which are convinced that this relationship should not thrive. So that's also an issue. But as I said earlier, to my mind, this SCO summit is extremely important because this is going to be the first major summit where all these leaders will come face to face. It is very easy to make statements sitting in your own capitals, making statement against it, but very difficult to do so when you are face to face with another leader. You have to be civic, and I think that is where I think you can build up personal equations because like Pakistani the Prime Minister's first time, probably Prime Minister Modi may have met him when he had gone to Nawaz Sharif's home or something, but I don't think so he would have had any official engagement with him. Even with Xi Jinping, I think we need to know what is it. I think both the leaders must be having their perspective. Even Xi Jinping wants a cordial relation because his party Congress is just next door. He won't want a confrontation because he is facing resistance within the party. So he would want to project himself.
Absolutely. And the disengagement perhaps is the biggest sign of thaw between both countries. And as all three of you have rightly said, that perhaps both countries need each other and we have to maintain that cordiality, because of which perhaps the timing of the disengagement is largely an indicator of what's happening. Mr. Chaudhary, also talking about concerns, Mr. Bansal mentioned how China's dominance or dispute with Pakistan will continue to be irritants. One common area of interest has also been SCO's, efforts towards counter-terrorism. But analysts say not much has been done enough practically. So they've just been meeting, there have been groups that have been discussing, but on the ground, very less has been done when it comes to counter-terrorism efforts. As we take presidency next year, do you think India will pursue counter-terrorism? We've been suffering at the hands of cross-border terrorism. This is something that we will place at the top of the agenda?
We will try, but keep in mind that our primary source of terrorism is Pakistan. And unfortunately, that is, of course, China's closest ally. So we can best hope for broad principles to be agreed. But to be able to call out Pakistan, which would be our number one goal, would almost certainly be blocked by Beijing. So we will be looking at a more abstract arrangement, but I think we will also be looking to tighten maybe on the sides of the SCO or on or bilaterally or plurilaterally, our engagement on counterterrorism with the Central Asian countries. They have been very concerned at the rise of the return of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and it is Afghanistan in many ways that I think we will see a lot more common traction between us and the SCO members. Pakistan will simply be, as I've said, an abstract concept, as long as China, as mentioned, is numero uno within the SCO.
Mr. Bansal, another interesting aspect of the SCO this time is the expansion of the grouping, and perhaps Iran is set to become a member of this grouping now. How do you look at Iran benefiting from being a member of the SCO and vice versa?
See, Central Asia is the arena for contestation of different powers which have been trying to spread their influence. Earlier, it was felt that Central Asia is totally under Russian control. The China made deep inroads into it. Now we see Turkey making deep inroads into Turkic-speaking countries. There are, of course, countries like Tajikistan which have languages which speak Persian languages, which speak languages which are of the... So they have, I think both Iran and Turkey rightfully have deep interest in Central Asia for historical reasons also. And I think Iran is very keen that it builds up more such relationship, because Iran has gone through a long period of sanctions. It would want to build relationship which can withstand sanctions, because what Iran has seen is that the countries like China could withstand sanctions. But if Iran can have trade across Caspian Sea or something, if it can export its products or it can import things across, I think it will hold it in good stead. More importantly, as I said, Iran being a theological state has its own theological objectives also, as far as Central Asian states are concerned, which are predominantly Islamic as far as faith is concerned, though they have been pursuing strongly secular ethos from the Soviet days and have a very strong polity which adheres to. So Iran has an interest. There are other countries which are, as I said, besides the regular members, you will have a lot of interesting countries participating, including Belarus, which is coming from there. You have Sri Lanka, which is to participate after the economic crisis. So to my mind, this summit is actually, there are plethora of opportunities and anything can happen. Actually, I think the global community's gaze would be focused on this particular
Okay, and Ambassador Puri, the plethora of opportunities indicates multilateral cooperation. That's something India has been, putting its thrust upon. Is that something that we are likely to see in the years to come within the SCO?
Tina, I like that Mr. Bansal has always avoided the use of that one term, which is pregnant with possibilities. He's used every other word to describe the situation. Mr. Bansal, I agree with you. Possibilities are immense. What will be delivered, we'll have to wait and see. But I do think that in-person coming together of leaders, the biggies, as well as all the others in the broader, so let me say South Asian, Central Asian region, is particularly important, and of course there will be a great element of the global gaze on it. I have no doubt. In terms of cooperation, Tina, look, India is a country which firmly believes that on a lot of problems you need to have global cooperation.
Absolutely.
It isn't for nothing that Vasudhaiva Kutumbam is something that we talk about at every place. So whether it is greening the planet, greening economies, whether it's climate change, whether it's humanitarian response, or it is a matter of, looking at the issue of fundamentalism, counter-terrorism, we are strong believers that you need to have approaches which are beyond bilateralism, large scale, indeed multilateral, at least at the least plurilateral. So Afghanistan has been mentioned. It should be a point in which, other than one country, there should be general coalescing that the issue of Afghanistan should not let it at all become a hub of terrorism. That is very important.
Certainly.
On fundamentalism, again, there may be a degree of coalescing. So is it on green economy. But of course, there are issues of divergences. We'll see what happens. But the whole idea of this summit taking place in person, I think, is greatly useful for the region and I dare say for the globe itself.
Absolutely. The focus has to be on making the most out of the areas in which there is convergence rather than focusing on areas of divergence. So let's see how it pans out. Mr. Chaudhary, one last question on the bilateral meetings that are going to happen on the sidelines. One confirmation that we have is between Prime Minister Modi and the Russian President. The possibilities and the outcomes that you see coming out of this important visit, of this important meeting that is likely to take place?
I think a lot of that will be largely about economics in the sense that we are, as you know, buying a fair amount of Russian oil. We'd like to get some gas, but we've been having some problems. So we're particularly interested in fertilizer supplies, especially given our food inflationary issues. The Russians may push for offer some long-term contracts to us on gas, which may be on oil at reasonable discounts. But I think for them, the primary demand will be do not join the G7 price capping grouping that has been proposed, which I don't think India plans to join, but India could use that as a negotiating chip to extract some more concessions on the economic front from Russia. We'd like to see I'm sure there will be a discussion in the war in the Ukraine, but India's position has been neutral, and I think that neutrality will remain dominant in our posture regarding the war. What I do gather is that India will seek to counter any attempt by China or Russia to make the SCO overtly anti-Western, because it believes that will not be something good for the future of the SCO, and definitely not for India's chairmanship next year.
Absolutely. So what's going to be India's focus with the kind of bilateral meetings that the Prime Minister will have with the Russian President, with the President of Uzbekistan? If at all he meets the Chinese President, is something that we'll all have to wait and watch. And what significant outcomes emerge from this critical SCO Summit, which is very important. The host of reasons have been listed out by our panelists. So we'll all have to wait and watch as to how the SCO Summit happens and the highlights that emerge once this summit ends on the 16th of September. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you once again to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Perspective today, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. Absolute pleasure to have all three of you on the program today. So that's it from us on this edition of Perspective today, viewers. Thank you for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now with another topic and a different set of panelists. Until then, you take care of yourselves and keep watching Sansad TV.